The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Phoenix as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos wiped the oil from her hands with an old rag. The weapons maintenance bay buzzed with its usual activity, the sound of cleaning rods scraping through barrels mixing with the constant hum of the air conditioning unit that barely kept the desert heat at bay. Maria had been at this station for 8 months now, and everyone knew her as the woman who could make any rifle sing like new. She picked up another M4 carbine from the rack, her experienced eyes immediately spotting the telltale signs of improper maintenance. The bolt was sticky, the trigger mechanism sluggish, and she could see carbon buildup around the gas tube. Another weapon returned by soldiers who thought a quick wipe-down was sufficient care for a tool that could mean the difference between life and death. "Santos, you got another one for the magic treatment," called out Corporal Jenkins, wheeling in a cart loaded with more rifles. He was grinning, but there was genuine respect in his voice. Everyone in the company knew that when Maria worked on their weapons, they came back better than factory new. "Just bring them over here, Jenkins," Maria replied, not looking up from her work. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, disassembling the rifle with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Each piece was laid out in perfect order on her workbench, a systematic approach she had developed over years of working with firearms. The weapons bay was her domain. While other soldiers complained about the monotony of maintenance duties, Maria found peace in the precise mechanical work. There was something almost meditative about the process of breaking down a weapon, cleaning each component, and rebuilding it into something reliable and deadly accurate. Her colleagues often joked that she could disassemble and reassemble an M4 blindfolded, and they weren't entirely wrong. "Hey, Santos!" another voice called from across the bay. Maria looked up to see Private Rodriguez approaching with a concerned expression. "My rifle's been jamming during training exercises. Think you can work your magic on it?" Maria nodded, accepting the weapon and immediately beginning her inspection. The problem was obvious to her trained eye: improper lubrication and a worn extractor that needed replacement. "Give me 2 hours, Rodriguez. I'll have her running smooth as silk." As she worked, Maria's mind wandered to her past, something she rarely allowed herself to dwell on during duty hours. Before her current assignment, she had been part of a different world entirely, a world where precision meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, where a single shot could change the course of an entire operation. But that life was behind her now, carefully buried beneath the mundane routine of weapons maintenance. The truth was, Maria Santos had requested this assignment specifically. After 3 tours in specialized operations, she had grown tired of the weight that came with her particular skill set. The bureaucrats and officers saw her current role as a step down, a waste of her talents. They didn't understand that sometimes the most skilled warriors chose the quiet battles, the unseen contributions that kept everyone else's weapons ready for war. Her reputation in the maintenance bay was built on more than just technical knowledge. Maria understood weapons at a fundamental level that went beyond training manuals and standard procedures. She could feel when a rifle's timing was off, could hear the subtle differences in bolt operation that indicated worn parts, could predict failures before they happened. This intuitive understanding made her invaluable to the soldiers who depended on their weapons. "Santos, you're like a weapon whisperer or something," Private Thompson commented as he picked up his freshly serviced rifle. "This thing hasn't shot this clean since it left the factory." Maria allowed herself a small smile. "Just doing my job, Thompson. Make sure you keep up with the daily maintenance schedule this time." The afternoon brought its usual stream of soldiers with weapon problems. A sticky safety mechanism here, an inconsistent trigger pull there, each issue requiring Maria's careful attention and expertise. She worked with steady concentration, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of disassembly, cleaning, adjustment, and reassembly. It was during this routine afternoon that Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb made his entrance into the weapons bay. Webb was the company's designated marksman, a role that came with considerable prestige and an ego to match. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his own press releases, and his reputation as a shooter had only inflated his sense of importance. Webb was tall and lean, with the kind of confident stride that announced his presence before he spoke a word. His uniform was always immaculate, his bearing perfect, and his opinion of himself astronomical. He had joined the company 3 months ago, transferring in from another unit with glowing recommendations and a folder full of marksmanship awards. "Well, well," Webb said as he approached Maria's workstation, his voice carrying across the bay. "If it isn't our resident gear monkey." He set his customized M14 rifle on her workbench with more force than necessary, the metal clanging against the steel surface. Maria looked up from the weapon she was working on, her expression neutral but alert. She had heard about Webb, of course. In a company this size, reputations traveled fast, and Webb's reputation was that of a skilled marksman with an attitude problem. She had been expecting this encounter eventually. "What can I do for you, Sergeant Webb?" she asked professionally, her tone giving away nothing of her thoughts about his manner. "My rifle needs attention," Webb said, leaning against the workbench with casual arrogance. "But I suppose even you should be able to handle basic maintenance on a real weapon." His emphasis on real weapon was clearly intended as a slight against the standard infantry rifles she usually serviced. Maria examined Webb's M14, noting immediately that it was indeed a precision instrument. The rifle had been customized with a high-quality scope, an adjustable stock, and a match-grade barrel. It was the kind of weapon that cost more than most soldiers made in several months, and it was clearly Webb's pride and joy. "Nice rifle," she commented, beginning her initial inspection. "Custom barrel work, I see. Who did the modifications?" Webb's chest puffed slightly with pride. "Had it done by the best gunsmith on the East Coast. This weapon has helped me set company records for accuracy. Not that someone in your position would understand the demands of precision shooting." The comment was clearly intended to put Maria in her place, to establish the hierarchy between a mere maintenance technician and a designated marksman. Webb's tone suggested he viewed her as little more than a glorified janitor for weapons, someone whose job was to clean and oil while the real warriors handled the serious business of war. Maria continued her examination without responding to the provocation. She could see that the rifle had been well maintained, though there were signs of heavy use. The bolt showed wear patterns consistent with extensive firing, and the trigger mechanism would benefit from adjustment. It was good equipment in capable hands, she had to admit. "Tell you what," Webb continued, apparently encouraged by her silence. "Maybe sometime I'll show you what real marksmanship looks like. Might be educational for someone who only sees weapons broken down on a workbench." Other soldiers in the maintenance bay had begun to notice the exchange. Some looked uncomfortable with Webb's condescending tone, while others seemed curious about how Maria would respond. She had earned considerable respect in the company, and Webb's dismissive attitude wasn't sitting well with everyone present. "I appreciate the offer," Maria replied calmly, still focused on the rifle. "But I'm pretty busy keeping everyone's weapons operational. Speaking of which, your trigger pull is inconsistent, the sear engagement needs adjustment, and your bolt face could use attention. Give me until tomorrow morning." Webb frowned slightly, perhaps expecting more of a reaction to his provocations. "Just make sure you don't mess anything up. This isn't some grunt rifle that can handle sloppy work. This is a precision instrument that requires someone who understands the finer points of accuracy." "I'll be careful," Maria assured him, her tone still professional and even. As Webb left the maintenance bay, several soldiers exchanged glances. Corporal Martinez, who had been working nearby, approached Maria's station. "Guy's got an attitude problem," Martinez commented quietly. "Thinks he's God's gift to marksmanship because he won a few competitions." Maria didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on Webb's rifle. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the irony of the situation. Here was a man so confident in his superiority as a marksman, so dismissive of her abilities, that he had no idea he was talking to someone who had once been considered among the best precision shooters in the entire military. Her current role as a weapons maintainer was a choice, not a limitation. After years of high-stakes operations where every shot carried enormous consequences, she had deliberately stepped back from that world. The pressure, the responsibility, the weight of knowing that lives depended on her ability to place bullets exactly where they needed to go. It had become too much. But just because she had chosen a different path didn't mean she had lost her skills. If anything, her time in maintenance had deepened her understanding of weapons systems. She knew these rifles better than ever, understood their mechanical behavior at a level that went beyond mere marksmanship into the realm of engineering. As the afternoon wore on, other soldiers continued to bring weapons for service, each interaction a reminder of the trust they placed in her work. These men and women depended on their rifles in ways that went beyond sport or competition. For them, weapon reliability was literally a matter of life and death, and Maria took that responsibility seriously. Private Johnson approached her station carrying an M16 with obvious problems. The rifle was making unusual sounds during cycling, and Johnson looked worried about its reliability. "Santos, this thing's been acting up during exercises," he explained. "Making weird noises when I fire, and the ejection pattern is all wrong." Maria accepted the rifle and immediately began her diagnostic process. Her hands moved over the weapon with practiced expertise, checking headspace, bolt extension, and carrier alignment. The problem became apparent quickly: a worn bolt that was allowing excessive gas leakage, causing timing issues throughout the operating system. "Your bolt's shot, Johnson," she explained, showing him the worn surfaces. "I can replace it, but it'll take a couple days to get the parts requisitioned." "Can you fix it temporarily?" Johnson asked anxiously. "We've got qualification exercises coming up, and I can't afford to fail." Maria considered the options, her mind automatically calculating the various adjustments and modifications that might provide a short-term solution. This kind of problem-solving was what separated her from ordinary maintenance technicians. She didn't just follow manuals and procedures, she understood the underlying mechanical principles that governed weapon function. "I can modify the gas system slightly," she decided. "Reduce the port pressure to compensate for the gas leakage. It won't be a permanent solution, but it should get you through qualification." As she worked on Johnson's rifle, Maria found herself thinking about Webb's dismissive comments earlier. There was something particularly galling about being looked down upon by someone who clearly had no understanding of the complexity involved in her work. Precision shooting was indeed a demanding skill, but precision gunsmithing required a different kind of expertise entirely. The work on Johnson's rifle took the better part of 2 hours, requiring careful measurement and modification of the gas port to achieve the right pressure balance. When she finished, the rifle cycled smoothly and quietly, the timing issues completely resolved. "Santos, you're a miracle worker," Johnson said gratefully as he tested the rifle's operation. "This feels better than when it was new." "Just remember to put in that parts request," Maria reminded him. "This is a temporary fix. You'll need a new bolt eventually." As the day shift ended, Maria found herself alone in the maintenance bay with Webb's customized M14. She had saved his rifle for last, partly because precision weapons required more time and attention, but also because she wanted to work on it without an audience. The rifle truly was a beautiful piece of equipment. The custom barrel work was expertly done, the trigger mechanism was high quality, and the scope was top-of-the-line military hardware. It was the kind of weapon that could produce exceptional accuracy in skilled hands, and Maria had to admit that Webb probably was a competent marksman to be trusted with such expensive equipment. As she disassembled the rifle, Maria's experienced hands immediately identified the issues she had mentioned to Webb. The trigger sear was wearing unevenly, causing inconsistent pull weight and break point. The bolt face showed signs of improper headspace, which would affect accuracy over long shot strings. These weren't catastrophic problems, but they would definitely impact precision shooting performance. Working by herself in the quiet bay, Maria allowed her movements to become more fluid, more instinctive. Her hands moved over the weapon components with the kind of intimate knowledge that came from years of experience with precision rifles. She could feel the subtle imperfections in metal surfaces, could sense the microscopic variations in tolerances that affected weapon performance. The trigger work required particular care. Maria used precision stones and careful polishing to smooth the sear surfaces, creating a crisp, consistent break that would enhance accuracy. She adjusted the engagement angles, tested the pull weight, and fine-tuned the reset mechanism until everything operated with mechanical perfection. The bolt and barrel interface received similar attention. Maria checked headspace measurements, polished contact surfaces, and made minute adjustments to ensure perfect alignment between bolt face and chamber. These were modifications that went far beyond standard maintenance procedures, requiring the kind of gunsmithing knowledge that took years to develop. As she worked, Maria couldn't help but smile slightly at the irony of the situation. Webb had been so condescending about her role as a maintainer, so dismissive of her understanding of precision shooting. If he only knew that she was improving his rifle's accuracy potential beyond what any factory or custom shop could achieve, using techniques learned through years of working with the most demanding precision applications. The final step was scope alignment and bore sighting. Maria used precision instruments to ensure the scope was mounted with perfect mechanical alignment, then performed a careful bore sight to establish the initial zero. When she finished, Webb's rifle was mechanically capable of accuracy that would exceed anything he had achieved with it before. Standing back to admire her work, Maria felt the familiar satisfaction that came from transforming a good weapon into an exceptional one. Tomorrow, Webb would get his rifle back and probably never realize how much its performance had been enhanced by the woman he had dismissed as just a maintenance technician. But Maria knew that mechanical perfection was only part of the equation. A rifle's accuracy potential meant nothing without a shooter skilled enough to exploit it. And while Webb was undoubtedly competent, she suspected his ego might be writing checks his abilities couldn't cash. As she locked up the maintenance bay for the night, Maria reflected on the strange turns her career had taken. A few years ago, she had been operating in environments where shot placement was measured in fractions of inches, at distances most people couldn't imagine. Now she spent her days cleaning carbon deposits and adjusting trigger springs, work that most people would consider mundane. But there was honor in this work too, she reminded herself. Every rifle she serviced could save lives. Every improvement she made could mean the difference between mission success and failure for the soldiers who carried these weapons into harm's way. It might not carry the glamour of precision shooting, but it was important work nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring Webb back to collect his rifle, probably with the same condescending attitude he had displayed today. Maria was curious to see if his opinion of her abilities would change once he discovered how much his weapon's performance had improved. Probably not, she suspected. People like Webb rarely acknowledged the contributions of those they considered beneath them. Still, she had done her job to the best of her abilities, transforming his good rifle into something truly exceptional. Whatever happened next, she could take satisfaction in knowing that she had given him every possible mechanical advantage. Whether he could make use of it remained to be seen. The next morning arrived with the usual desert heat and bustle of military life at Camp Phoenix. Maria Santos arrived at the weapons maintenance bay early, as was her habit, wanting to complete her final checks on Webb's rifle before the morning rush began. The customized M14 lay on her workbench exactly where she had left it, now mechanically perfect and ready to perform beyond its original specifications. She ran through her final inspection checklist with practiced thoroughness. Headspace measurements were precise, trigger pull was consistent at exactly 3 pounds with a crisp break, and the scope mounting was rock solid. The rifle that Webb would receive back was substantially improved from the one he had brought in, though she doubted he would recognize the extent of her work. The morning maintenance requests began arriving shortly after 7 o'clock. Soldiers filed in with the usual array of problems: stuck cases, feeding issues, accuracy complaints, and the endless battle against desert sand that seemed to find its way into every mechanical component. Maria worked through each issue with her characteristic precision, but part of her attention remained focused on Webb's rifle and the inevitable confrontation to come. Staff Sergeant Webb arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, his timing clearly calculated to coincide with maximum foot traffic in the maintenance bay. He approached Maria's workstation with the same swagger he had displayed the previous day, though she noticed he glanced around to ensure he had an audience for whatever performance he was planning. "Is my rifle ready, Santos?" he asked, his tone suggesting he expected problems with her work. "I hope you didn't mess with anything important. That weapon has very specific requirements." "All finished, Sergeant Webb," Maria replied professionally, retrieving the rifle from her secure storage area. "I addressed the trigger inconsistency and adjusted the bolt face alignment you were experiencing. The rifle should perform significantly better now." Webb accepted the weapon with obvious skepticism, immediately beginning an inspection that was clearly intended to find fault with her work. He examined the scope mounting, checked the bolt operation, and dry-fired the rifle several times to test the trigger mechanism. Despite his apparent desire to find problems, he couldn't hide his surprise at the improvements. "Trigger feels different," he commented suspiciously. "What exactly did you do to it?" "Smoothed the sear surfaces and adjusted the engagement angles," Maria explained. "The pull weight is now consistent at 3 pounds with minimal over-travel. You should find it more predictable." Webb continued his inspection, clearly reluctant to admit that the rifle felt better than before. Finally, apparently unable to find any obvious flaws, he slung the weapon across his shoulder with exaggerated care. "Well, I suppose we'll see if your work holds up under actual use," he said dismissively. "Real marksmanship puts different demands on equipment than playing around on a workbench." Several soldiers in the bay exchanged uncomfortable glances at Webb's continued condescension. Corporal Martinez, who was dropping off his own rifle for service, shook his head disapprovingly at Webb's attitude. "Santos does good work, Sergeant," Martinez interjected. "My rifle's been running perfectly since she worked on it last month." Webb turned toward Martinez with obvious irritation. "Corporal, there's a difference between making an infantry rifle function adequately and maintaining a precision instrument. No offense to Santos here, but there are levels to this kind of work." The comment hung in the air like a challenge, and Maria felt something shift inside her. She had been content to let Webb's arrogance slide, accepting his dismissive attitude as the price of maintaining her low profile. But there was something about his casual dismissal of not just her skills but the importance of her work that struck a nerve. "Is there a problem with the work I've done on your rifle, Sergeant Webb?" she asked quietly, her tone still professional but with an underlying edge that hadn't been there before. "No problem," Webb replied with a condescending smile. "I just think it's important to maintain realistic expectations about what different people are capable of. You do fine work within your limitations, but precision shooting is a specialized field that requires specific expertise." The maintenance bay had grown quiet as other soldiers sensed the building tension. Even the usual sounds of cleaning and maintenance seemed muted as everyone focused on the confrontation developing between the arrogant marksman and the respected weapons maintainer. "What kind of expertise?" Maria asked, setting down the rifle she had been working on and giving Webb her full attention. Webb seemed pleased to have drawn her into the discussion, apparently viewing this as an opportunity to further establish his superiority. "Understanding ballistics, reading wind conditions, managing environmental factors, weapon target mechanics, the technical aspects that separate recreational shooting from professional marksmanship." "Interesting," Maria replied calmly. "And you believe these concepts are beyond someone in my position?" "Not beyond you personally," Webb said with false generosity. "But your job here is maintenance, not application. It's like the difference between being an automotive mechanic and being a race car driver. Both important roles, but very different skill sets." The comparison was clearly intended to put Maria in her place, establishing Webb as the skilled practitioner while relegating her to the support role. But instead of backing down, Maria found herself studying Webb with the same analytical attention she usually reserved for problematic weapon systems. "That's an interesting analogy," she said thoughtfully. "So in your opinion, someone who understands the mechanical principles behind weapon function wouldn't necessarily understand the practical application of those principles?" "Exactly," Webb said, apparently missing the subtle challenge in her tone. "Theory and practice are two very different things. I'm sure you know plenty about how rifles work mechanically, but that doesn't translate to understanding how to use them effectively in real-world conditions." Private Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the exchange, looked increasingly uncomfortable with Webb's attitude. "Sergeant Webb, maybe we should just let Santos get back to work. She's got a lot of weapons to service today." But Webb seemed energized by the confrontation, perhaps sensing weakness in Maria's measured responses. "Actually, Rodriguez, this is educational. It's good for everyone to understand the different roles we all play. Santos does important work keeping our weapons functioning, but that's very different from the demands of precision shooting." "What kind of demands?" Maria asked, her voice still calm but with growing intensity. Webb straightened, clearly prepared to lecture on his favorite subject. "Shot placement under pressure, compensation for environmental variables, understanding of trajectory and windage, the ability to make first-round hits at extended distances under combat conditions. These aren't skills you develop working at a maintenance bench." "How extended?" Maria asked quietly. "How extended what?" "Distances. How extended are we talking about?" Webb paused, apparently sensing that the conversation was moving into territory he hadn't anticipated. "Well, that depends on the situation, of course. Standard engagement distances for designated marksmen range from 300 to 800 meters, though I've made successful shots at over 1,000 meters during training exercises." "Impressive," Maria said, though her tone suggested something other than admiration. "And you believe these skills require extensive specialized training?" "Absolutely," Webb replied, regaining his confidence. "Military marksmanship is a specialized discipline that takes years to master. It's not something you pick up casually or learn from books." The maintenance bay had become completely quiet now, with every soldier present focused on the increasingly tense exchange. Some looked worried about where the conversation was heading, while others seemed curious about Maria's unusually direct questioning. "You mentioned making first-round hits under pressure," Maria continued. "What kind of pressure situations are you referring to?" Webb shifted uncomfortably, perhaps beginning to realize that Maria's questions were more informed than he had expected. "Combat situations, obviously, when lives depend on accurate shot placement and there's no opportunity for corrections or follow-up shots." "And you have experience with these kinds of situations?" "I've trained extensively in combat marksmanship scenarios," Webb replied defensively. "Stress shooting, moving targets, adverse weather conditions, time pressure, all the variables that separate real marksmanship from paper-punching competitions." Maria nodded thoughtfully, but there was something in her expression that made several soldiers take notice. Those who knew her best could see that her usual calm demeanor was being replaced by something harder, more focused. "Training scenarios," she repeated. "That's valuable experience, certainly. But I was curious about actual operational experience. Combat situations where mission success depended on precision shooting." Webb's face reddened slightly. My training has been comprehensive and realistic. I don't need to justify my qualifications to a maintenance technician. The comment was clearly intended to end the discussion by reasserting the hierarchy Webb believed existed between them. But instead of retreating, Maria stepped closer to her workbench and picked up a small brass object that had been lying among her tools. "Do you know what this is, Sergeant Webb?" she asked, holding up the object for his inspection. Webb squinted at the item, clearly confused by the sudden change in direction. "Looks like a spent cartridge case, probably from a .308 round." "Close," Maria replied. "It's actually from a .300 Winchester Magnum, fired from a custom rifle at a distance of 1,147 meters. One shot, one kill, mountain environment with crosswinds gusting to 15 knots. The maintenance bay had become absolutely silent. Webb stared at the cartridge case with growing confusion, clearly not understanding its significance or why Maria possessed such specific information about it. "That's interesting," he said uncertainly. "But I'm not sure what that has to do with our discussion about weapon maintenance versus marksmanship." Maria set the cartridge case down carefully and fixed Webb with a steady gaze. "The shot was taken at night using thermal imaging against a target who was threatening the lives of American soldiers. The rifle was a custom .300 Win Mag that I had personally modified and zeroed. The environmental calculations, wind compensation, and ballistic adjustments were performed under combat stress in approximately 30 seconds. Webb's expression began to change as the implications of her words sank in. Other soldiers in the bay were staring at Maria with new understanding, pieces of a puzzle they hadn't known existed suddenly falling into place. "The rifle was similar to yours," Maria continued quietly. "Same basic platform, though chambered in a different caliber. Like your M14, it required precise mechanical adjustment to achieve its accuracy potential. Unlike your rifle, however, my life and the lives of my teammates depended on that accuracy." "What are you saying?" Webb asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand exactly what she was saying. "I'm saying, Sergeant Webb, that before I became a weapons maintainer, I spent 6 years as a sniper with special operations. 3 tours, 43 confirmed kills, and a reputation for making impossible shots under conditions that would make your training scenarios look like summer camp." The revelation hit the maintenance bay like a physical force. Soldiers who had worked with Maria for months stared at her in shock, suddenly understanding that the quiet, professional woman who serviced their rifles was something entirely different from what they had assumed. Webb looked like he had been struck by lightning. His face went through several color changes as he processed the information, apparently trying to reconcile his image of a maintenance technician with the reality of a combat-proven sniper. You were a sniper?" he managed to ask. "Scout sniper, actually," Maria corrected. "Marine Corps, then transferred to Joint Special Operations. My specialty was long-range precision shooting in support of direct action missions. The kind of work where mechanical perfection isn't just important, it's the difference between mission success and dead teammates." She gestured toward Webb's rifle, still slung across his shoulder. "The modifications I made to your rifle last night were based on techniques I developed working on weapons that had to perform flawlessly under combat conditions. Your trigger is now better than anything available from the factory because I understand not just the mechanical principles, but the practical requirements of precision shooting." Webb seemed to shrink visibly as the full weight of his misconceptions became apparent. Around the maintenance bay, soldiers who had witnessed his arrogant behavior looked embarrassed for him, while others seemed to be reassessing everything they thought they knew about their weapons maintainer. "Why didn't you tell me?" Webb asked weakly. "Tell you what?" Maria replied. "That I used to be a sniper? Why would that matter? My job here is to maintain weapons, not to impress people with my previous assignments. I do this work because I believe it's important, not because I lack other options." The simple dignity of her response made Webb's earlier condescension look even worse by comparison. He had assumed she was in her current role because of limited capabilities, never considering that she might have chosen it deliberately. Corporal Martinez stepped forward, his expression mixing admiration with concern. "Santos, if you were special operations, why are you here doing maintenance work?" Maria was quiet for a moment, considering how much of her story she wanted to share. Finally, she spoke with characteristic directness. "After 3 tours in combat zones, I needed a break from being responsible for taking lives. I requested this assignment because I wanted to focus on keeping weapons operational rather than using them against people. It seemed like a good way to use my knowledge while stepping back from the sharp edge of war." The explanation hung in the air, giving everyone in the bay insight into a decision that was clearly more complex than it appeared on the surface. Webb, meanwhile, seemed to be struggling with the complete reversal of his assumptions about their relative positions. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "I just assumed—" "You assumed that someone in a support role couldn't have operational experience," Maria finished for him. "It's an understandable mistake, Sergeant Webb, but it's also why you should be careful about making judgments based on incomplete information." The rebuke was delivered calmly, but it carried enough weight to make Webb flinch visibly. Around the bay, other soldiers watched the exchange with fascination, seeing their respected weapons maintainer in an entirely new light. Private Johnson, who had benefited from Maria's expertise the previous day, shook his head in amazement. "Santos, that explains why you always seem to know exactly what's wrong with our rifles before we even tell you the symptoms." Maria smiled slightly. "When your life has depended on weapon reliability, you learn to recognize problems before they become failures. It's not magic. It's just experience with what happens when things go wrong under stress." Webb still seemed to be processing the revelation. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "I feel like an idiot," he admitted. "Everything I said yesterday." "You didn't know," Maria said simply. "But maybe this can be a lesson about making assumptions. My current job doesn't define my capabilities any more than your current job defines yours." The comment was gracious, but Webb clearly understood that he had revealed significant flaws in his judgment and character. His dismissive attitude toward Maria and her work now appeared not just wrong but embarrassingly ignorant. "Is there anything else you need help with, Sergeant Webb?" Maria asked, clearly indicating that she was ready to return to her normal duties. Webb shook his head, still looking stunned by the turn of events. "No, thank you for the work on my rifle. I'm sure it will perform better now." As he turned to leave the maintenance bay, Webb's usual swagger was completely absent. He moved like a man who had just discovered that his worldview was built on fundamentally flawed assumptions, and everyone present could see the transformation. After Webb left, the maintenance bay buzzed with quiet conversation as soldiers discussed what they had just witnessed. Many were asking each other if they had suspected Maria's background, while others wondered what other secrets their colleagues might be carrying. Maria, meanwhile, returned to her workbench and picked up the next rifle in her queue, apparently ready to continue with her normal routine. But those who knew her best could see that something had changed. The quiet, self-contained woman they had known had revealed a steel core that transformed their understanding of who she really was. The morning's revelations would spread throughout the company by afternoon, fundamentally altering how people viewed both Maria Santos and Marcus Webb. But for Maria, the important thing was returning to the work that gave her purpose and peace, even if that work would never look quite the same to those around her. Word of the morning's confrontation spread through Camp Phoenix like wildfire. By noon, everyone from the company commander to the newest recruits had heard some version of the story about the weapons maintainer who turned out to be a decorated special operations sniper. The tale grew in the telling, as military stories often do, but the core facts remained consistent and shocking. Maria Santos continued her work with characteristic professionalism, but she could feel the changed atmosphere around her. Soldiers who had always been respectful now approached her with something approaching awe. Others stared when they thought she wasn't looking, trying to reconcile their image of the quiet maintainer with the combat veteran who had just revealed herself. Staff Sergeant Webb, meanwhile, had essentially disappeared after leaving the maintenance bay that morning. Several soldiers reported seeing him at the shooting range, apparently testing his newly modified rifle with obsessive intensity. Word was that he was shooting better than ever before. The improvements Maria had made allowing him to achieve accuracy levels he had never reached previously. The afternoon brought an unexpected development when Captain Rodriguez, the company commander, appeared at the maintenance bay. Maria looked up from the rifle she was cleaning to see the captain approaching with a serious expression that suggested this wasn't a casual visit. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Captain Rodriguez said formally, "I need to speak with you privately." Maria set down her work and followed the captain to a quiet corner of the bay, wondering if the morning's revelations had caused problems she hadn't anticipated. She had kept her operational background confidential for good reasons, and now those reasons might be coming back to complicate her carefully constructed new life. "I've been hearing interesting stories about you today," Captain Rodriguez began, his tone neutral but probing. "Stories about special operations experience that wasn't in your personnel file when you transferred to my company." "My previous assignments are classified, sir," Maria replied carefully. "I was told my current security clearance was sufficient for maintenance duties." "I'm sure it is," the captain agreed. "But I'm curious why someone with your apparent background requested assignment to weapons maintenance. That's usually not where we put our most experienced operators." Maria had been expecting this conversation ever since her confrontation with Webb. Military bureaucracy didn't like surprises, and the revelation of her background was definitely a surprise to the company leadership. "I requested this assignment specifically, sir," she explained. "After 3 combat tours, I wanted to step back from operational duties. Maintenance work allows me to use my technical knowledge while avoiding direct combat responsibilities." Captain Rodriguez studied her for a moment, clearly trying to read between the lines of her carefully worded response. "And you're satisfied with your current duties?" "Yes, sir. I find the work meaningful and important." The captain nodded slowly, but Maria could see he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, regardless of your reasons, it seems your background has become common knowledge as of today. That might create some complications for maintaining your low profile." Before Maria could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion from outside the maintenance bay. Raised voices and the sound of multiple soldiers gathering suggested something significant was happening in the compound. "What the hell is that about?" Captain Rodriguez muttered, moving toward the bay entrance to investigate. Outside, they found a crowd gathering around the shooting range, where Staff Sergeant Webb was apparently staging some kind of demonstration. He had set up his newly modified rifle at the 1,000-meter line and was making a show of preparing for what appeared to be an extremely long-range shot. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb called out loudly, his voice carrying across the compound, "I want to demonstrate what real precision shooting looks like. This is the kind of marksmanship that separates professionals from amateurs." Maria felt a sinking sensation as she realized what was happening. Webb, humiliated by the morning's revelations, was apparently trying to reassert his superiority through a public display of marksmanship. The crowd gathering around the range included many of the soldiers who had witnessed their earlier confrontation. "Is he targeting the 1,000-meter plates?" Captain Rodriguez asked, raising binoculars to observe Webb's setup. "Looks like it, sir," replied Sergeant Martinez, who was standing nearby. "He's been out here for 2 hours, making adjustments and talking about showing everyone what expert marksmanship looks like." Maria watched as Webb made his final preparations, checking his scope settings and settling into his shooting position. She could see from his body position and rifle handling that he was indeed skilled, though his technique showed the stiffness of someone operating under pressure rather than natural confidence. The first shot rang out across the range, and spotters with binoculars called out the result. "Miss, right side," came the announcement, indicating that Webb's shot had failed to hit the target. Webb's face reddened visibly, even at distance. He made rapid adjustments to his scope and prepared for a second attempt, his movements now betraying frustration and mounting pressure. The second shot was also a miss, this time falling short of the target. The crowd began murmuring among themselves, and Maria could see that Webb's public demonstration was not going according to his plan. "He's overcorrecting," Maria observed quietly, her trained eye reading the signs of a shooter fighting his equipment rather than working with it. Captain Rodriguez looked at her sharply. "You can tell that from here?" "His body position changed after the first miss," Maria explained. "He's tensing up, which affects his natural point of aim. Plus, he's making scope adjustments too aggressively instead of reading the wind conditions." As if to confirm her analysis, Webb's third shot was another miss, this time going wide to the left. The crowd was now openly commenting on his performance, and the demonstration that was supposed to showcase his superiority was turning into a public embarrassment. "Someone needs to stop this before it gets worse," Captain Rodriguez muttered. "This is turning into a circus." "Sir," Maria said quietly, "maybe I can help." The captain turned to her with surprise. "How?" "Let me talk to him, shooter to shooter. This isn't about marksmanship anymore. It's about ego and pressure. If he keeps going like this, he'll destroy his confidence completely." Captain Rodriguez considered the suggestion, clearly weighing the potential complications against the need to resolve the situation before it became a bigger spectacle. "Go ahead," he decided, "but keep it low-key. We don't need more drama today." Maria approached the shooting line where Webb was preparing for his fourth attempt. Up close, she could see the frustration and embarrassment written across his face, along with the determination of someone who refused to quit despite mounting evidence that he was in over his head. "Sergeant Webb," she said quietly, positioning herself where she wouldn't distract him, but could speak without the crowd overhearing. "Mind if I offer a suggestion?" Webb glanced at her with a mixture of desperation and resentment. "Unless you can magically fix my shooting, I'm not interested in advice right now." "Your rifle is fine," Maria said calmly. "The problem isn't mechanical. You're fighting the shot instead of allowing it to happen naturally." "What does that mean?" Webb asked, though his tone suggested he was more interested in continued shooting than conversation. "You're making scope adjustments based on emotional responses to misses instead of reading the actual conditions," Maria explained. "Each shot is being influenced by your reaction to the previous one, creating a cycle of overcorrection." Webb paused in his preparation, perhaps hearing something in her analysis that resonated with his experience. "So what would you do differently?" Maria glanced around at the crowd, many of whom were now paying attention to their conversation. "Start over, reset your scope to your original 0, take 3 deep breaths, and shoot your natural point of aim without worrying about the previous misses." "That's it?" Webb asked skeptically. "That's it," Maria confirmed. "Your rifle is mechanically capable of making this shot. I worked on it personally, remember? The question is whether you can get out of your own way long enough to let it happen." Webb studied her for a moment, clearly torn between pride and the growing realization that his current approach wasn't working. Finally, he made the scope adjustments she had suggested, reset his position, and began his breathing routine. The fourth shot cracked across the range with a different sound, more controlled, less rushed. The spotter's call came back immediately. "Hit! Center ring!" A cheer went up from the crowd, and Webb's face transformed from frustration to amazement. He looked at Maria with something approaching gratitude mixed with confusion. "How did you know that would work?" he asked. "Because I've been where you are right now," Maria replied simply. Pressure shooting is 90% mental and 10% mechanical. You have the technical skills, but you were letting the situation control you instead of controlling the situation. Webb nodded slowly, apparently processing not just the successful shot, but the lesson that came with it. The rifle does feel different since you worked on it. Better than I've ever experienced. Good equipment makes everything easier, Maria agreed. But equipment can't shoot by itself. It still requires a skilled operator. The crowd began to disperse as the drama of the situation resolved itself, but Maria noticed that several soldiers lingered to observe the aftermath of the confrontation. Captain Rodriguez approached with an expression that mixed relief with continued concern. "Nice shooting, Sergeant Webb," the captain said diplomatically. "Though maybe next time we could skip the public demonstration." "Yes, sir," Webb replied, his earlier bravado completely absent. "I think I got carried away." As the group prepared to leave the range, Webb approached Maria one more time. "Santos, I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for yesterday and everything I said about your work." "No apology necessary," Maria said, though her tone suggested she appreciated the gesture. "We all make mistakes when we don't have complete information." "It's more than that," Webb insisted. "I was being arrogant and dismissive because I felt threatened by someone I didn't understand. That's not professional, and it's not the kind of soldier I want to be." Maria studied him for a moment, seeing something in his expression that hadn't been there before, genuine humility and the kind of self-awareness that suggested real character growth. "Everyone has something to learn from everyone else," she said finally. "You're a skilled marksman, Sergeant Webb. You just need to trust your abilities instead of trying to prove them constantly." "Maybe you could teach me some of those techniques you mentioned," Webb suggested hesitantly. "The ones for managing pressure and maintaining consistency." Maria smiled slightly, the first genuinely warm expression she had shown him since their initial encounter. "I think that could be arranged, but not as student and teacher, as professionals sharing knowledge." "I'd like that," Webb said, and for the first time his response seemed completely honest and without ulterior motive. As they walked back toward the company area, Captain Rodriguez fell into step beside Maria. "You handled that well, Santos. De-escalated a situation that could have become a real problem. Just applied some basic psychology, sir. Shooters under pressure need confidence, not criticism." "Is that something they taught you in special operations?" the captain asked. "That's something you learn through experience, sir. When your teammates' lives depend on your shooting, you develop techniques for managing stress that go beyond just marksmanship fundamentals." The captain nodded thoughtfully. "Well, regardless of where you learned it, you used it effectively today. Thank you." Over the following days, the dynamics at Camp Phoenix settled into a new normal. Maria's background was now common knowledge, which changed how people interacted with her but didn't change her commitment to her work. If anything, the revelation seemed to enhance her effectiveness, as soldiers now understood that her advice came from genuine combat experience. Webb, meanwhile, underwent a visible transformation. His earlier arrogance was replaced by a more thoughtful approach to both his duties and his interactions with others. He began spending time at Maria's workstation, not to criticize her work, but to understand the technical aspects of rifle performance that could improve his shooting. "I never realized how much the mechanical condition of a rifle affected accuracy," he admitted during one of their conversations. "I always figured if it fired, it was good enough." "Most people think that way," Maria replied, adjusting the trigger on another soldier's rifle. "But precision shooting reveals every mechanical flaw. A rifle that works fine for general-purpose shooting might have timing issues that create inconsistency at long range." "Could you teach me some basic gunsmithing?" Webb asked. "I'd like to understand my equipment better instead of just relying on it." Maria looked up from her work, surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. "Sure, but it takes patience and attention to detail. There's no shortcuts to real understanding. I've got time, Webb said simply, and I think I've learned something about the value of understanding things thoroughly instead of just assuming I know enough. Their collaboration became one of the more positive developments to emerge from the initial confrontation. Webb's marksmanship improved significantly as he learned to better understand and maintain his equipment, while Maria found satisfaction in passing on knowledge that would make him more effective in his role. The change in Webb's attitude extended beyond his relationship with Maria to his interactions with all the soldiers in the company. His earlier condescension was replaced by a more collaborative approach that earned him genuine respect rather than the superficial deference his rank had previously commanded. "You know," Corporal Martinez commented one afternoon while watching Webb help a junior soldier with rifle maintenance, "that guy has really turned himself around. Used to be kind of a jerk, but now he actually seems to care about helping people improve." "People can change when they're given the right motivation," Maria replied diplomatically. "Sometimes a shock to the system is what it takes to see things more clearly." Captain Rodriguez had also taken note of the positive changes in unit dynamics. During his weekly staff meeting, he specifically mentioned the improved cooperation between the company's designated marksmen and the weapons maintenance section as an example of professional development worth recognizing. "Whatever happened between Santos and Webb last week," he told his senior NCOs, "it seems to have resolved itself in a way that benefits everyone. Webb's performance has improved, the weapons maintenance quality remains excellent, and unit morale is better than it's been in months." For Maria, the resolution of the conflict with Webb represented something more significant than just workplace harmony. It validated her decision to step back from operational duties while still finding ways to contribute meaningfully to the mission. She had proven, both to herself and others, that her current role was a choice rather than a limitation. The brass cartridge case from her first confirmed kill remained on her workbench, no longer a hidden reminder of her past, but an acknowledged symbol of experience that informed her present work. Soldiers would occasionally ask about it, and Maria would share appropriate details about the technical challenges of long-range shooting while keeping the more sensitive operational information confidential. "Every shot tells a story," she explained to Webb during one of their training sessions. "This one tells the story of preparation, patience, and the importance of mechanical precision under pressure. Those lessons apply whether you're taking a life or just trying to hit a target at the range." Webb nodded thoughtfully, understanding that the lesson was about more than just marksmanship. "I'm grateful you were willing to share your knowledge with me, despite how I acted initially." "Everyone deserves the chance to learn and improve," Maria replied. "That's what we're here for, to help each other become better soldiers and better people." As the weeks passed, the story of their confrontation and subsequent collaboration became part of the company's culture. New soldiers arriving at Camp Phoenix would inevitably hear about the weapons maintainer who was actually a decorated sniper, and the designated marksman who learned humility through a reality check that changed his perspective completely. But for Maria Santos, the most important outcome was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her skills and experience continued to serve a useful purpose. Whether maintaining weapons or mentoring fellow soldiers, she had found a way to contribute to the mission while staying true to her own values and needs. The desert sun continued to beat down on Camp Phoenix. Weapons continued to require maintenance and adjustment, and soldiers continued to depend on reliable equipment in an uncertain world. Through it all, Maria worked with the same dedication and precision that had made her an exceptional sniper, now applied to the different but equally important task of keeping others' weapons ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the end, the confrontation that began with mockery and dismissal had evolved into mutual respect and shared purpose, proving that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected sources, and that everyone has something to teach if others are willing to learn.